So a couple weeks ago, I made a video on Path of Radiance mages, and I mostly mentioned the third mage in that game, Tormod, as a bit of a footnote. I said I didn't see much reason to invest in him, but if you want to bonus experience him up, he is fine and serviceable. I got a lot of comments on that video about Tormod actually being quite good. A couple folks even arguing that he was among the best or was the best mage in Path of Radiance, and some pointing out that I didn't give consideration to his skill Celerity in the video. Which is fair, I didn't mention Celerity in that video and I should have. I also realized it had been quite a while since I used Tormod in an FE9 playthrough, so I did another Path of Radiance run using Tormod this time, and figured I'd do a follow-up video talking about him because he's kind of interesting. I'm also going to touch on Tormod's FE10 performance at the end of the video, but we're mostly going to focus on Path of Radiance. Tormod joins us after Chapter 15 as a level 7 mage with bases that look like this. For comparison, Ileana, who joined us in Chapter 8, was a level 6 mage with these bases. So, in the stats that matter, Tormod is just a bit better than our last mage that joined 8 chapters ago, and Tormod's growths aren't massively better either. He actually has a slightly lower magic growth compared to Ileana and a higher speed growth, and compared to Soren, he has a notably lower magic growth and a just slightly better speed growth. I like Tormod's growth spread a bit better than Ileana's for the speed, and I like Soren's growths the best of the three for his big magic growth, but there's not a humongous difference here. So at face value, there's actually quite a bit working against Tormod. His stats aren't significantly enough better than that mage that we got 8 chapters ago, and he starts out at the same level she did. He also joins just a few chapters before our first Sage pre-promote joins in Chapter 20. Beyond the obvious disadvantages associated with joining later in a game, which are that Tormod doesn't have as many opportunities to make early game contributions or earn on-map EXP like Soren and Ileana do, he also has 2 more disadvantages that are worth noting. First, he does not have as much time to grow his weapon ranks before siege tomes start showing up. Ileana or Soren can be working on their staff and weapon ranks for several chapters by the time Tormod shows up. Tormod joins us with a C rank in Fire, E in Thunder, and D in Wind. The C rank in Fire is actually pretty good. That means Meteor is going to be an option for him when it shows up in Chapter 20, but the Thunder rank is unfortunate. We get Bolting in Chapter 16, and we have our first opportunity to use it on a kill boss map in Part 4 of Chapter 17. Promoting Tormod to Sage gives you a D rank in Thunder, so you have until Part 4 of Chapter 17 to grind up that Thunder rank if you want Tormod to Bolting Oliver. To achieve this, we need to get 40 attacks in with the Thunder Tome to get his weapon rank up to C. And this is doable while staying within bonus experience turn requirements, but you're going to need to put some effort in. Or if you don't want to get those reps in, you could also just use an arm scroll, or not Bolting Oliver, or use a second mage for that. So the weapon ranks are manageable, but Tormod's staff rank is pretty cursed. If we promote Tormod immediately, he has E rank staves in Chapter 16, so getting him up to rescue rank in time to use it is quite the task, but even getting him up to ward rank by Part 3 of Chapter 17, so that he can spam it for staff experience and regular experience, is pretty annoying. Especially since you also want to be getting combat reps in so that he can get to bolting rank. So you have to decide whether you want to prioritize grinding up his staff rank or getting those thunder reps in. And if you don't get him to rescue rank, it's not the hugest deal. There are other units that can use the rescue staff. But being able to use the rescue staff is just sort of a nice thing that Soren and Ileana can do a lot more easily than Tormod. And it's not just about rescue. Having a slower start on grinding your staff rank also means that Tormod is going to have later access to Physic and Ward, which Soren and Ileana can be using on basically any non-combat turn to either make a small contribution or at least gain relatively free experience. Tormod doesn't get to do that until later. The other issue with Tormod joining later is that it really sucks to have to save bonus experience for him. Now, Soren and Ileana also both need a bunch of bonus experience. They can make do with a little less since they only need to be able to fight Chapter 9 and 10 enemies when you bonus experience them, but I like to promote them early, so for me these units use similar amounts of bonus experience when they join. The benefit that Soren and Ileana have, though, is that they're there for that initial bonus experience dump. So you just spent a bunch of time earning bonus experience that you weren't allowed to spend, and then you have a ton of it that you can dump on Soren or Ileana if you choose to. So the opportunity cost for spending bonus experience on Soren and Ileana is just that you are choosing to bonus experience them instead of someone else like Oscar. With Tormod, that cost still exists, but also we need to save bonus experience for him that we could have been using in the previous chapters to make them easier. Additionally, even if we bonus EXP Tormod to promotion immediately, he's still going to be lower level than a Soren or Ileana with a similar level of initial investment, because after that initial investment, they have 8 maps to be gaining experience and grinding weapon ranks before Tormod shows up. So if you want Tormod to be on par with where an invested Soren or Ileana would be by Chapter 16, he actually needs more bonus experience than they would have in Chapter 9. Alternatively, if you don't want to spend that extra bonus experience to pump Tormod up even more, you can also use Forges to make up for the initial difference between Tormod and a trained Soren. A 21 Tormod with a Forged Thunder performs pretty well against Chapter 16 enemies. But during my playthrough, I did find times where Tormod either couldn't one-round an enemy that Soren would have been able to, or where he needed a Might Forge that Soren wouldn't have needed in order to one-round an enemy. Still, if you give Tormod the bonus experience and the Forges, his 1-2 range combat is very good. Likely better than many of your physical units because Javelins can only forge up to 11 Might. So for a lot of units where resistance is lower than defense, units like Marcia will need to take them on at 1 range, while mages like Tormod can more often kill them at 1-2 range. This is a big part of why I like having a mage around. If you wanted to do a lower investment version of Tormod, you can also give him just a bit of bonus EXP and then Master Seal him, but his stats won't be overly impressive if you do this. Could be good enough if for some reason you want a filler magic unit for the 4 chapters you have Tormod for before Khalil shows up, but in this scenario she's probably going to be better than him since he didn't get a significant amount of bonus EXP. The overall point is Tormod joining later than Soren and Ileana with unimpressive bases means he misses early contributions, has to work harder to grind weapon ranks, and has a harder time one-rounding as many enemies as Soren or Ileana could, without additional bonus EXP or forges that Soren and Ileana may not need. So why would we use Tormod then? Well, the main reason is he comes with a skill, Celerity. This skill gives Tormod an additional 2 spaces of movement, and it is unique to him. You can't take it off and put it on another mage. Given that one of the biggest weaknesses of mages in Path of Radiance is their lower movement in a game that emphasizes high move horses and flying units, Celerity is a pretty exciting skill. It means you don't have to rescue drop Tormod as much, and you don't need to shove him around as much compared to lower move mages. Or, you can use those shoves and it gets Tormod even a little further than Soren or Ileana could get. However, I have seen many people say that this skill makes Tormod keep up with your paladins and flyers, and I don't think this is quite true. With Celerity, Tormod has 8 move after promotion, which is still 1 move slower than your promoted calves and flyers. Additionally, he doesn't have Canto, so it's a little trickier for him to use his full move every turn. Your paladins and flyers get to use most of their move a lot of the time because they can do something like move 3 spaces, attack an enemy, and then keep moving forward with the rest of their movement. If there's an enemy you want to one-round with Tormod that's 3 spaces away, Tormod has to choose between keeping up with the calves and attacking the enemy. The result is that you often do still end up having to shove Tormod around and occasionally rescue drop him, just not as often as you would need to do with Soren or Ileana. The biggest advantage I felt out of this is that because he doesn't need to be shoved as much, you can spend more shoves on another slow unit, or ensure that you can always use Mordecai's Smite on a mounted unit. So Solarity is really good. It makes Tormod more flexible, he needs less shoving and less rescuing, and he can get to spaces where he can siege tome enemies from quicker than Soren and Ileana can. But I don't think it allows Tormod to keep pace with your mounted units unless he's just not attacking. The only downside of Celerity, and it's not a real downside, is that it does take 15 SP, so if you want to keep that extra move on Tormod, you can't slap other good skill combinations on him like Vantage and Adept. He can fit one other skill on with Celerity though. Functionally, this just means he probably won't be quite as durable as someone like Soren can be with Vantage, Adept, and Ike support. But the reason I said that this isn't a real downside is because I think Celerity is just better than this setup. If I could have Celerity on Soren instead of Vantage Adept, I would. So it's worth noting that if you're trying to have a mage that can take a lot of attacks on enemy phase, Tormod might not be ideal for that, but for every other thing that you might want a mage for, the extra 2 move is better. Tormod also has a couple other niche advantages that are worth noting. One is that he has an actual strength stat, so he doesn't get weighed down by as many tomes as someone like Soren does, and this makes it easier for him to use things like El Thunder. Though Soren is a touch faster for most of the game as well, and his magic is pretty high, so it doesn't make a huge difference since Soren can usually get by alright with just a Thunder instead of a heavier tome. But it's still nice that Tormod can use heavier tomes to offset his lower magic without hindering his speed much. So on the whole, I largely stand by what I said in the original Mage video, but I would soften my stance a little bit. In that video, I said I don't think there's really a compelling reason to use Tormod, but after playing with him again, I think Celerity is a legitimate niche and a reason you might want to use him. It's also pretty fun. I like zooming around with him. But I do think the downsides of Tormod compared to the other mages outweigh the benefits of Solarity. The extra move is nice, but I don't think it overcomes his poor starting situation, or justifies saving bonus experience for him instead of just using it as you get it, given that his stats aren't notably better than other mages, and he misses out on a bunch of maps the other mages get to contribute on. Though his value might go up for you if you're interested in having two mages, but I suspect a lot of playthroughs only use one. And if you did want to use multiple mages, Khalil is right there and is pretty good competition for Tormod as well. So I regret not speaking more on Celerity in that last video, because it is a pretty neat skill, and if you want a mage that doesn't have to be moved around as much by your other units, Tormod is a fine choice. Just know that you are trading off some higher investment for that payoff. And despite Tormod's downside, he is a totally functional mage. If you've decided you want a mage and you didn't use Ileana or Soren, Tormod can do the job just later and with more stringent bonus experience requirements and less time to grind out staff ranks. And sadly, pretty close to Khalil's join time. So there's a lot of reasons why you might not want to use him, and for me, Celerity, while pretty cool, is not quite enough to make me want to use him on most playthroughs, but if you want a mobile mage, Tormod's the only one you get. And there is a funny thing you can do with Tormod if you want to invest in him even more and if you get the Night Ring, which is that you can toss the Boots and Night Ring on him and now he's a 10-move unit with Kanto. Sort of like a build-your-own Mage Knight situation. I do not think this is the best use of your Boots, but it is really fun, and if you hate the feeling of low-move mages in FE9, as I know many do, this is a fun way to make Tormod feel really good to use. Despite my being pretty down on him in this video, I do at least think Tormod occupies an interesting design space. A unit coming with higher move than other units in his class but a statistical deficit is an interesting concept, and it does make him feel very unique compared to the other mages. He can also act as a serviceable replacement unit if Soren or Ileana died, or if you elected not to use one and then decided you want a mage later, even if that can be a tough sell with Khalil right around the corner. Tormod existing as he does with Celerity makes him a much more interesting replacement unit design than just being a mediocre filler mage. So I really like that Celerity sets Tormod apart more than most replacement units, but I wish that his join situation was just a little bit better. An extra few levels to reduce the amount of bonus experience he needed might have gone a long way for me. With all that in mind, with all of Tormod's strengths and weaknesses considered, I must bestow upon FE9 Tormod the most average award I have to offer, the Tormod Award. Of course, FE9 is not the only game in which Tormod appears. In FE10, we see Tormod joining for a few chapters in part 1 of the game, and while in FE9 he came underleveled and in need of help, he's fantastic when you get him in Radiant Dawn. He comes in a tier 2 class with solid stats, and he can one-round or apply heavy chip to a lot of enemies that most of your units can't, all at a time where you're definitely looking for competent, self-sufficient combat units. There's only one problem with Tormod in Radiant Dawn, and it's a big one, which is that he gets done dirty by his availability. After part 1, Tormod goes away for a really long time. By the time our quick-footed mage comes back, you will likely have a squad of tier 3 promoted units, but Tormod is still going to be a sage. It's not like you can't use him, but the situation is pretty dire. We can bonus EXP him into usability, but the competition for the tower is steep, and it's pretty tricky for Tormod to make the cut. So Radiant Dawn is a pretty weird game for Tormod, where even though he won't see much use, you're gonna like him in the chapters you do use him. In part 1, Tormod is genuinely a huge help, and you'll probably just bench him when he returns towards the end of the game. But being a great unit for a few maps isn't the worst thing in the world, and a lot of units aren't going to see much use at the end of the game anyway. In a tiering sense, FE10 Tormod is not good. His availability really is that bad, and it's a tough sell to use him when he finally comes back at the very end of the game. But despite this, I actually think Radiant Dawn Tormod leaves a pretty good first impression as a great short-term unit when you really appreciate having one. It is unfortunate for him that in Radiant Dawn you can just take skills off of units, so Celerity can be taken off of him. This is nice for the player, because you get to take Celerity off of him and use it while Tormod is gone for most of the game, but it does take a little uniqueness away from Tormod himself. Still, for the few chapters that you're going to use him in FE10, he really does feel like a Tor god. Thanks for sticking around to the end of the video. If you enjoyed it, consider leaving a like or subscribe so you never miss an upload, and if you want to chat more or tell me how Tormod is actually the GOAT, check out the community Discord linked in the video description. And as always, a big thank you to my geckos on Patreon, and a shout out to my skinks, Red Mage Morgan, Chicken, Morg Wolf, Upscale Furry Trash, Cosplay Sylveon, Emma, Van West, Ike Poo, Lucy Sev, Romeo, Wingman, Lonely Voxel, Aaron Gedden, Micabre, Stars to Art, Doopy, and the Noodle Doodler. I really appreciate all of your support, and if you want to support the channel and get shoutouts in videos like this, you will find a link in the video description. Either way, thanks for hanging out, and have yourself a lovely week.